Hey, I'm Jeff Cook, and I'm here with Dean Kruse. Dean is an icon in Indiana and around the world with the classic car auctions. And tell us, Dean, a little bit about growing up in northern Indiana.
Well, I grew up here in Auburn. For a while, we lived on a farm up at Flint, Indiana, a big town called Flint, a population of about 25 people, one store. But anyways, we were on a 500-acre farm there. It flooded some because of the long Pigeon River. And but we were there for a few years. Outside of that, we grew up in this area. And my grandfather on both sides, my mother's name was Boger, and Lester Boger grew up here, and my grandfather on my dad's side was Fred Kruse, and he grew up here in Auburn, and right out here south of town. The farm's still there. And my nephew, John Kruse, lives in the old farmhouse yet. Okay. He got it remodeled, and he lives in it out there on County Road 68, about 4 or 5 miles south of Auburn. And my great-great-grandfather, James Kruse, settled there when he came from Germany.
Okay.
And my father was good at a lot of things and not so good at other things, but he was good at having kids. There were 7 in our family, 7 kids. He used to say, I have 5 boys, and each boy has 2 sisters. And people go, wow, well, you got 25 kids? And he'd say, no, they all have the same 2 sisters. But we grew up around here, and of course with 7 kids, you had everything going on. It was like a 3-ring circus. When you came home from school every day, there was always something going on. Somebody yelling, screaming, somebody beating up somebody, teasing somebody. My brother David locked his sister Diane in the restroom one time, and it got bug sprayed, was spraying it under the door. She was coughing, gagging, and crying, and my dad come in and threw a fit. I think David was a real teaser. He's a lawyer today, but he got in trouble. He was teasing everybody. He'd tease me, he'd do everything under the world.
Now, where did you fall in the age group?
I was the oldest.
You're the oldest. Okay.
I was the oldest, and I learned to cook.
Okay.
My mom didn't like housework much, and she always helped out. We had a bunch of cows. We milked 70, 80 head of cows back then with 3 milker machines. That was a job. But she'd have me cook. So I learned to cook, and I cooked for probably 10 or 12 years for the whole family.
Okay.
And when we fixed the big plate of meat, I always liked to pray, because nobody was going to know when I said amen, and I'd get the biggest piece every time. But David got onto that after a while, and he got after me. But we had, David's a lawyer today. Daryl, who passed away with cancer, was a lawyer. Dennis is a state senator. I had that Senate seat for a while. And then Dennis, I ran for Secretary of State, and Dennis became a state rep and then a state senator. Still is. He's been in probably 25 years. And then my brother Daniel lives in Texas, and he's in the auction business down there. Okay. My sister Diane married a guy from Pleasant Lake, and he worked for a company in Canada, and they had him come down to Fort Worth, near where Daniel lives, and open up a big heavy equipment rental dealership where they rent Caterpillar tractors and ditch diggers and all kinds of things like that. And he runs that place. He's got a good job right now. And my sister Debbie is the secretary for David's law firm here in Auburn.
Okay.
So we're all pretty well around here, and we're doing pretty good.
Yeah. And you got quite a few nieces and nephews and grandkids.
Oh yeah, lots of them. Yeah. I had 2 sons, Mitchell and Stuart, and they both were with me in the business. And then when we sold out, they both became ministers. Both of them as ministers. Mitchell has a TV ministry with about 82 stations around the world, and he's on every Sunday morning and Sunday night late. And then Stuart has a church. It's the fastest growing church in the state of Indiana. I got to tell you a little story about that. Back in about 1880, my great uncle or great great uncle and great great grandfather lived, one on one side of the church, one on the other. They had 2 farms, and they farmed together. And the hired man would go back and forth every other night, staying at one of their places. And one night he's walking by this little knoll in between them, and he saw a vision of a church, and he got all excited, and he ran to Eli's house, Eli Garrick, and he said, I had a vision that there's a church there. We need to build a church. We got to build a church. And he said, well, let me get my brother. So he went and got his brother, and the 2 of them talked a little bit, and Noah and Eli, and they decided, well, if you think that was God, we need to build a church there. So they built a little church there back in the 1800s, and that church was about 50 to 85 people for probably almost 100 years. And then they got a young guy named Bill Eddy from Anderson, Indiana, came out, and he was really a good little talker, a good guy. He just graduated from college, and he took it up to like 150 real quick, like in a year or so. And of course, big churches all over tried to hire him, and finally one that paid him so much money he left. And so it stayed there for another 20 years. And then Al Black, who was a teacher here and a counselor here at the Auburn DeKalb high school system, decided he wanted to go in the ministry. They were kind of having a hard time finding a minister. He took over, and man, he was good, and he really knew how to meet people and talk to people, and he built it up to 250.
And that's the pastor that married me and my wife.
Isn't that interesting?
And I grew up in that church.
Well, the unusual thing is his wife is a Garrick, who was a great niece of the ones that built the church. Okay. A lot of people don't know that, but she was a Garrick. Okay. So then Al had a heart attack. In fact, he later died. It was pretty bad. And his assistant was a big, tall guy. I can't remember his name right now. You probably know. Yeah, Bob.
Herman.
Yeah, Bob Herman took over. And Bob was a pretty good guy. He was a tall, lanky guy, about 6'6". And he hired my son, Stuart, and Darrell, the other lawyer that died with cancer, hired his son, Dane, to be his assistants. Well, lo and behold, he had a stroke in about 2 years, and it was really bad. They thought he was going to die. He was in the hospital, I think, maybe a year. So they turned it over to Stuart, the main pastor, and Dane as the pastor for the youth.
Yeah.
And believe it or not, I can't believe it was like 260 people. Today, they have for Easter, they had almost 3,500 in 3 services. Think of that. That little church they built, and I think God had that vision that would someday be one of the biggest churches in the whole area. It's out in the middle of the country.
Yeah, it's out in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah, and it's one of the biggest churches in Indiana right now. Yeah.
So now, tell us a little bit more about your growing up. Now, you went to Auburn to school? Okay, Leo to school?
Leo High School. Back then, we still, the family farm where John lives is Jackson Township. Yeah. At that time, at Jackson Township, you could go to Spencerville, St. Joe, Leo, Garrett, or Auburn, because they had no affiliation with any school whatsoever. All right. So we all chose to go to Leo.
Okay. Now, did you play sports and stuff?
Yeah, I played basketball, and we had a pretty good team. I played center, and we were in a sectional championship game in Fort Wayne. That was back when all 750 schools in Indiana had one class. So you'd play. Leo had like 300 people, and we played a school with 3,000. Wow. It was interesting. But anyways, South Side in Fort Wayne was undefeated, and they had probably the best basketball team in the history of the state of Indiana. And we played them in the sectional championship, and our game was the closest of any game they had the whole time. They won the final championship like 40 points. The center of their team, the reason I'm telling you, the center's name was Tom Boyard. He was 7'2" or 3. And my coach told me, he said, you get behind him. I had to guard him because I was center. And he said, you push him. You keep shoving him, get him out of his position all the time. Well, he was so big that I could shove him my whole put both arms straight out, and he'd never move. He'd just bend his back. He could bend that far, not even, I thought, man, that's really interesting. It was exciting. But I played sports, and in fact, the Chicago White Sox offered me a chance to go up there.
Huh. Okay. Now, did you go to any college or anything after that? Or
no. I went to Auctioneers School, Auctioneers College.
Okay.
And my dad, I had a chance to go with the White Sox. He said no. Back then, you traveled a bus and made $6,000-7,000 a year all the time in the minors. Anyways, he said, why don't you get to be an auctioneer, because I got to hire somebody to help me and go to auction school. And so that's what I did, and it turned out pretty good. We had sales all over everywhere.